Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Shared Services Joint Committee here tonight at the Civic Centre in West Paddock in Leyland on Thursday, the 3rd of February 2022. Moving straight on, and any apologies for absence? It appears that we have everyone here.
Yes, Chair, we just had apologies from Councillor Wilson, and Councillor Morwood is substituting for him.
Okay, thank you, welcome. Agenda item 2 is the minutes of the meeting on Tuesday, the 2nd of November 2021 of the committee. These are to be approved as a correct record and signing off. Do we have any questions or comments on those minutes from anyone? Sure. Okay, they're moving a second. Everyone happy? Okay, then the minutes of the meeting on Tuesday, the 16th of November 2021. Again, I'm happy to approve those minutes. Any comments from members of the committee?
Yeah. Can I just make one, please, Paul?
Councillor Walton.
Yes, it's thank you, Chair. On page 6, it's about it was suggested that members of the Conservative and Labour group at South Ribble meet to discuss, and that a member briefing on the subject could be beneficial. Have we got any discussions about when a member briefing might take place?
So, yeah, thanks, Karen. So that, just to clear that up, that's on the regarding staff surveys and staff morale. Yeah, and so that's coming to cabinet, but we will I think it's coming to cabinet in March, I do believe. But we will recognise, Karen, that we undertook to we'll have a separate discussion amongst group leaders as well about that, and all members as well. Of course we will, but I think it's March that it's going to cabinet. So happy to, other than those comments from Karen, we're happy to accept the minutes. Okay, perfect, thank you. Moving swiftly on then. So any declarations of interest from any members of the committee? No? Good. Agenda item 5, the Shared Services Monitoring Report, and that is being delivered by Vicky. Yeah, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So I'll quickly just take us through the report. This is the Shared Services Monitoring Report. The last one was brought to this committee in June, and this one focuses on an update on Phase 1 services. As we include customer and ICT, we will expand the monitoring to incorporate those services as well. And just a note that on that basis, we've also reviewed the approach to monitoring performance. So you can see from point 11 that we will, in response to feedback provided by this committee, include a general update report at every meeting, just to cover off highlights within that period. We'll also then have a more formal quarterly performance report, which will contain similar information to this report. And then we'll do a more thorough annual review, which will include a detailed benefits realisation. So that's the proposal for the framework in terms of shared service performance monitoring going forwards. And at point 15, we include a breakdown of the timeline for the next reports coming forward. So moving into the report itself, this report covers budget, staff satisfaction, performance of the service development plans and risk. We've also got an additional appendix this time, which is some examples of shared best practice for information for members. I can cover that briefly. So in terms of the savings and budget information contained in the table at point 1, that is the splits for the Phase 1 services. Well, the initial shared services work around the senior roles for Phase 1, and then Phase 2 in terms of the shared senior management team, the shared director posts. You can see there an overall total saving of 729,000. Just noting where costs have increased in some areas. That's mainly in relation, well, that is in relation to staffing, where we've been seeking to strengthen or build resilience in those particular functions. So I think they're the key points on the finance, and then we've also got a breakdown of how those costs are split out for each authority at point 5. Moving to staff satisfaction, this is the Shared Service Pulse survey that we do, which is a smaller subset of questions for shared services staff to gauge how satisfied they are within that environment. Overall, we can see at point 8 an improvement in overall satisfaction, which is really positive. this survey was undertaken at a similar time to the main staff survey. However, on a brief look across the two, they are generally comparable in terms of the overall findings. So key points would be that most staff feel that they have the skills and knowledge needed for their role, and overall high levels of satisfaction, with feedback mainly pointing towards opportunities to further develop our shared expertise, and getting ultimately a better understanding of what the shared role involves, which is something that we're going to be developing now that we're back with more flexibility around bringing teams together and being able to do some of that development work face to face. Some of the challenges were in response to people who were particularly involved at that stage of the change, and also some of the future opportunities in terms of development, and see those points at 13, in terms of continuing to support staff, providing development opportunities, and integrating newly established teams. So we've got plans in place for how we will now bring the new ICT and customer services into the shared service environment. Just looking at service level performance, in a summary of the development plans, each of the shared services has a development plan in place as part of their review, and through these reports we'll track progress against those development plans. So at point 17 you can see an update for transformation and partnerships, which includes things like the new shared performance management system, which is paying dividends and providing a much more user-friendly experience in terms of collecting our performance data. Shared policy frameworks which are now in place, and additional graduate roles to further bolster capacity in that area and to bring new talent into the organisations. In terms of the communications and visitor economy, progressing well through their development plan, including some savings on the on staffing budgets achieved already. And then looking at governance, again, positive developments in terms of bringing the shared model together, and increasing capacity for health and safety across the councils. Just looking at the risk register, there are 4 risks, the key ones being organisational disruption and impact on performance and service delivery, and staff uncertainty and impact on the workforce, which are scored the highest with clear action plans in place. And then I think the final thing in this report is an appendix which provides more detail on the service development objectives, split down for each of the shared services, and then finally that additional appendix which includes examples of best practice between the two councils. So some examples of where South Ribble have shared best practice with Chorley, including things like the Performance and Project Leads network, which is up and running and now functioning really well. That's an opportunity for network that peers to come together, so members of staff to come together and work collectively on performance and project management in a peer forum, so that's working really well. The HR policies, which have come across with some aspects of shared of South Ribble best practice being applied in terms of the shared policy framework. And then some additional expertise, just to pull out a couple of examples around the green agenda as well. Looking from Chorley to South Ribble, enhancements around the governance and some of the expertise and knowledge in that area, which has obviously achieved outcomes in terms of the current governance position. And then also some of the structural changes around things like service leads and other kind of best practice in that area. So that's a quick summary of the report. So happy to take any questions on that.
Thanks, Vicky. Very detailed report as always, and we thank you for that. And personally, find it dead easy to follow and read, and a good news story. I'm hoping that we can all agree as a committee. There's lots going on. Shared services, the savings and budgets, as I say, £729,000 across the two authorities, which, if my mathematics is correct, is equivalent to about a 10% increase in council tax against 2 borough district councils. That's what we're looking at to make that we've saved the community. And the job, as I say, the staff survey, the job satisfaction, I'm quite gobsmacked by I'm really pleasing to see the staff survey. Clearly, it's, you know, the staff enjoy working in the shared services and they're thriving in that environment. So, good. Can I ask a question, Vicky? How do we go about now ensuring that the two sovereign councils get sight of this report? How we're going to work through that now? Because clearly, and we might come on to that shortly, there's some potential challenges within South Ribble about shared services and misinformation, should we say. So how do we now ensure that this report gets into every member's inbox of both authorities? Does it go to the scrutiny committees? Does it go to the councils in any way? How do we work through this?
I think it's an open report in terms of it's published, so it's available for anybody to view and to scrutinise, and we can provide an update as part of performance reporting, as part of quarterly performance reporting, to set out some of the highlights.
Okay, just one sec, Chris.
Just really, because I'll probably be making a similar point when I get to the next agenda item. I suspect we can probably take at least some of the elements of this in if we were to move forward with the proposals that I'm making in the report that I'm going to be presenting. We can bring some of the elements of this performance reporting into the report that could go to the two full council meetings as well, so it will then get discussed there.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Alistair?
Thank you, Chair. I think I like the report. I think it's generally in the right direction. I'm interested what others might think about that, because some others were out demanding it more than we were, but we all wanted to see something like this. I'd like if the table on point 5 actually added up at the bottom corner. I'm sure Sam would have spotted that. It's not picking the last column up, the 931,000 at the bottom, so Gary, hang your head. A spreadsheet not working. Blimey, who would have thought it? But yeah, I think it focuses on the right things, which is particularly the staffing, which we've said is an issue. It focuses on the money, which is always important, and it focuses on some of the joint learning and the resilience, which again we wanted to focus on. I think maybe what we need to do, Chair, is to feedback from this report after this meeting individually for any things we'd like to see that aren't in here, and that can be then collated for the next meeting to see, you know, feedback and understanding, because it's not only when you sort of sit down and study it in detail and link things together that you see it. I mean, I've read it a couple of times now, but and I think it will have to be, to quote that terrible phrase, an iterative document that changes over time as we change the focus of what we're looking at. But I think it's a decent start for 10.
Thanks, Alistair. Any other comments? David?
Thank you, Vicky. I'm so glad Alistair brought up the thing about the budget, the numbers, so I don't have to. The staff satisfaction table at 8.8. I think you said in passing that it was fairly similar on the all staff survey. I'm curious, because in a time of I've been through some of these changes myself, been on the receiving end, if you like, and it can be difficult, and some people don't respond well, and I was one of them twice. But it suggests that, okay, we'd always like people to be higher up in the overall satisfied in our job bit, and any number of things will go into that. But wouldn't you have expected it to be less positive, given that we've got so many changes and there are people in as well as outside the shared services having to cope with not really being totally sure what's going on?
Thank you very much, Councillor. So this table relates to responses from the Phase 1 shared services. So they are the services that were shared some time ago and have now been in place for probably best part of 12 or 18 months. And I think what the table shows is that with those services now well embedded and working together, we do see higher levels of satisfaction within that environment. So at the moment, that is all of the teams who have been working in this way, and they clearly have developed a good understanding of what their role is and how they can access training, development and support, compared to perhaps services that may be outside of the shared service environment. So I think it is, in terms of change, I think it demonstrates that, yes, the change process is difficult, but once you're on the other side of it and into the shared services environment, it does develop, and we do see positive staff feedback from it. Does that answer the question that you were?
What I was saying is you suggested that this was reflected somewhat in the overall staff survey, I think. And some of those people have still got to go through the process. So you would perhaps expect that they would have a very mixed view of the overall job satisfaction and how their confidence is sitting before they go into the shared services, perhaps.
Yes, apologies, that makes sense. So the main staff survey, we carried out a survey of staff within shared services and a survey of staff within the South Ribble Council. So we were able to see a breakdown of the two. So the point I was making was that this pulse survey is roughly in line with the findings from shared services in the main staff survey. So because we split the two surveys for the whole council, we were able to see a breakdown for shared services and for other council staff, and the findings in this pulse survey reflect the findings for shared services in the main council survey, so they are broadly similar.
So to be clear as well, Vicky, so ICT and customer services weren't in shared services when this was taken, and clearly what you're going to say to us as well is that in the coming months, in the next quarter, we'll be resurveying the staff again in shared services with those elements. Those members of staff spoken to as well, because clearly we're all acutely aware that there's been some significant challenges in ICT, for example, over the last few months. So it's just a snapshot in time of and we'll keep monitoring this. Gary? Yeah,
David's absolutely right, actually. And what we will see is, and as Vicky says, this is when you're through it. What we'll be able to tell you is that as people are going through it, they're finding it more of a challenge. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that, and it affects morale. It affects the rest of the scores. But what we're tending to find is that there's still quite a lot of positivity, but they like us to do things better. Some of the change stuff has been a real challenge, absolutely, and that's the feedback from the challenge, and we need to find a way to work through that as well. So yeah.
Thank you. I'd assumed it would be like that, but the ones that were actually through the system and actually in the shared services, the satisfaction would be higher. My concern is that it's the ones that are not in it, I think, is where the discontent, if that's the right word, or unhappiness lies, because they don't know whether they're going to go through it or what is going to happen to them. So I can understand that once you're through the system, that's good. And there was just a point also I'd like to refer to on page 12, if I may, where we've got the splits on the budget and everything, and we've got the mayoral service, and I can understand where it's 50-50 and one person is 100%. I can understand that. But on the legal, I thought all the people in the legal services were now shared, but it says that there is still one that is 100% South Ribble, and I wondered where that was that in something to do with the particular service?
Can we look into it? Because we all of us just looked at each other and went, I can't remember which one it is. Can you remember, Gary?
Land charges. Yeah. Land charges. I nearly had them. I'm thinking I've better just one. So do we not share land charges at all? Is it not? Right, okay.
So I'm going to ask the question that Margaret's thinking. Why? Yeah. So why? Why would we not do that?
Yeah.
It's just that there was a very different setup in the way that they were being delivered at the time. So I suspect it may well be when we get to our next agenda item that people start suggesting and saying, well, this seems like a relatively straightforward one to share because it's the same whichever council you work for, it's just a different area you're covering. So yes, it was just that it was a very different setup, and so it didn't match up when we were doing the phase 1 services.
Okay, thank Alan.
Thanks very much, John. Just reflecting on something that Chris said a little earlier about how part of this report could be added to the next report. I think that's a little difficult because that, you know, I think there needs to be an openness about the report and warts and all. I think what could happen if we absorb some of it, it would skew towards we need to move further. Now, that's going to depend on different councillors. I think it's far better to put this report as it is out to the councillors and then to reflect on the second report, not to absorb any part of it.
Yep, absolutely fair point. I agree totally. Karen, then Matthew. Do you want to just quickly? Sorry, just bear with a second.
On that same point then, so would it go back to Cabinet, or would it go back to full councils if it went back as a standing report like this? Just a question, and I'm not leading anywhere at all.
I think off the top of my head, I think it's probably an executive function, so I think it would normally go to Cabinet. I mean, to be honest, it could go to either. So if we were presenting a report, for example, around the future of shared services, it seems to make sense to have it alongside so councillors can see a rounded discussion.
Yeah, because I think certainly as an initial report, it'd be better if it went to full council initially, and then in future becomes business as usual and goes again to get that full commentary back. Might be useful.
I don't disagree. I think we should do that. I think that report should go to full council this time and then start feeding through the Cabinet, definitely.
That's Paul. That, if I recall, that was the concern last time, that maybe all members weren't in the loop. So this is a way of bringing them into the loop. So I think the council route is the right one.
Perfect. Karen?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to my being a member of our scrutiny committee, I would just really appreciate if this would come in front of scrutiny to monitor the implementation and the impact of the shared services we've had at the moment. And can you assume that would happen?
I thought that was the function of this committee, to be honest with you, to scrutinise the shared services. But I'm more than happy. I can only speak on behalf of South Ribble clearly, but I'm more than happy for anything to be scrutinised within the scrutiny function at South Ribble. So if there's no, Alistair, do you want to? Councillor
Walker chooses what he drags to scrutiny at Chorley, and I have no input on it whatsoever, Chair. So he'll do what he wants.
Yes, you know, we're not going to hold us back. Absolutely. Matthew?
Yeah. As a former chair of the scrutiny committee, I would have said, if I want to scrutinise this, I will scrutinise it. So you need to have that conversation with Councillor Howard, I presume, as the chair of scrutiny. Thanks for the report. I quite enjoyed seeing it all brought together, because sometimes we forget what we've done and where we're up to. So I found it really useful. And I also think that sharing it with full council would also be useful, because it acts almost as a myth buster. And to say to people, I know you're hearing whispers about this and murmurs about that, but this is where we actually are. And I think that would be a really powerful message for some. When we're talking about shared services, so much of it is about how much can we save. And we've always said, haven't we, it's not just about that. It has to be about building stronger teams, improving the career prospects for some of our staff. And the bit that I really enjoyed reading was the best practice sharing. Sometimes over here we're better at this than you, and now that we work together, look, this is how we've done it, and vice versa. And I think that's just really, really powerful as to how shared services has brought improvements to us. I think that's really good.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I wholeheartedly agree. I saw today actually something interesting. It was with the communications teams of the two authorities working together. We're advertising each other's functions, for want of a better word, and works that we're trying to do. So Chorley Flower Show will be getting, on the Twitter feed of South Ribble's Council, and our Music in the Park was on Chorley's Facebook page today, which was great. I don't know if you bought your tickets yet, Alistair, but we can send you the link. Yeah. So yeah.
You don't want to see it.
No. So Powell's really, really looking forward to meeting you, Alistair, I'm told. So
you'll be leading the charge up for this.
But it's good. No, it is really, really good, and it's positive to see. And it is the misinformation we need to deal with that. And and it's there's the dreaded Chorley takeover words that we hear, and it's just, and then the other mutterings. But the shared services, you just need to look at the staff satisfaction. You need to look at the services that provide in the resident survey as well, which is coming forward in South Ribble. I don't know if Chorley's done one recently as well, but they're satisfied with what's been presented to them for the hard-earned cash that they pay us, which it's all very, very positive. David?
Yeah, sorry, I just jibbed a bit when you kept saying misinformation. I know there are conflicting views. I think what it is, if it's anything like the situations I went through, there's a lot of uncertainty. You make some assumptions. Whether you can always characterise it as misinformation, I'm not sure. It may just be they're not 100% confident.
So David, just to be absolutely clear, I'm not suggesting that's just towards the staff, it's towards politicians. Saying that Alistair's running South Ribble Council and that it's a Chorley takeover and blah, blah, blah. That's what I've said about misinformation, not the staff. We just need to deal with it. Gary?
Yeah, just make a few points, I suppose. The point about misinformation, it's change, isn't it? And our challenge is to bring people with us on it. So the more we can tell them and give them the opportunity to have a voice in it, is fine by me. And hopefully some of those issues that are raised will be dealt with through that process. That's fine. I think it's right and proper we put on record our thanks to the staff who've done an amazing job in this respect, if I'm honest. To think through the pandemic, actually, we did all this stuff, which was challenging at best, in normal times. To think, through the pandemic, we did a lot of this stuff, and staff have kind of risen to the challenge. But we shouldn't underestimate how difficult it is for staff. Actually, working across two councils is a big ask, and we've got some challenges, I think, in terms of resourcing and that kind of stuff. And I do need to, I'll be teeing you up to say, well, we are having a review of that because we think there are some areas where we haven't quite got it right yet, and we might need to invest in some of those services. And because I like my spreadsheets, just let's not forget, because I like a running total, is there's also another £500,000 on an annual basis that we saved from the financial and risk and audit shared services. So actually the number's much larger than on an annual basis than is important in this. And I think we should keep the running total going as well. Just a reminder.
Well, there's an amendment, Vicky, because we need that adding in as well. I think that's important to not just for our councils but for our residents and for us as the committee. Margaret?
It's more of a comment than anything else. As a group, we have been committed to shared services. We started it and we are committed to it, and we have been. I don't think it's misinformation. I think there is sometimes a perception by people that when they look around and they look at and you get the top table and you see who is at the top table. And I don't think you can get away from that, because the senior officers at the top table are perceived and come from Chorley. And that's where I think the problem has been. I'm not getting as any officer because I think they're doing a good job, and they wouldn't be in the position they're in unless they were qualified to do it. But you can't get away from the fact that at the top table, people who are in a senior position, and you look on your paperwork and it comes back, contact Chorley. And these are the little bits of things that actually members see and look at and think, Chorley. And I don't think it's just me that looks at it that way. And I think that's what you've got to combat, is that the people who are in positions are doing the job that they're appointed to. And they're now for both councils. And I think that's where the difficulty lies. I don't think it's if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, and plus understand what you're saying, Margaret, but we've got to move on at some point from that. And because we're not looking back, we're looking forward, and there's a number of demonstrable reasons why we are where we are. And don't forget, South Ribble dismissed its chief executive, and the two deputy chief executives both resigned, so they weren't even considered for the roles. And, but at some point we need to move forward. And I don't doubt your commitment to shared services. It's certain members within your groups commitment to CSOs, where they're campaigning, and this needs to be said, where they're actively campaigning in the community that South Ribble Borough Council is being taken over by Chorley, and that we're trying by, and this is comments from your group, Margaret, that there's by stealth there's going to be a unitary authority through shared services, and that's not the case. And and I think that's for this committee. We need to drive this forward because it's an overwhelming success. And at some point, the senior officers work for both councils now. In fact, actually, I do believe you're a South Ribble employee now, Gary, aren't you?
I am.
You know, for example, you know, and so we do at some point need to move forward. That's all. It is only a small number of people that are doing it, Margaret. So Margaret and then Alistair and then Gary.
Just come back on that. I'm not against it. And I think the examples that there are some good practices in South Ribble are in this report is a very positive thing to have done. Because I think other than that, what I'm trying to say to the committee is that you've got to understand the perception. It's not necessarily misinformation, it's sometimes a perception, and we've got to work on that to try and get over that. And that's the only way we will move forward. I'm not looking back, I'm looking forward. But we've got to make sure that we do look forward and we explain it properly to people and that they understand it, as I understand it, because I'm part of shared services.
So I absolutely concur with your comments about misconception. I accept that, but there is also misinformation, and they are two separate things for me. So Alistair and then Matthew. Sorry, Gary wants to. No.
Yeah, defer. And Matt's going back to Pat's comment about myth busting. It's about getting the facts out there. The facts are out there. You can interpret the facts however you like, but you can't deny that the facts are the facts, and that's what we need to be doing. You'll also be reassured, Margaret, to know that you're in the same camp as our MP, Lindsay Hoyle. I never thought I'd say that in a public meeting, but you are, in that he was lambasting our chief executive of the week for sending him an email with his South Ribble hat on, and should have different buttons for different people. That's where we are at the minute. It's not ideal. It creates confusion. You're quite right. And when, you know, like I said, it makes strange bedfellows of people at times, I'm sure you'll appreciate. But we need to get over that. So there's ways to get over that. We explain the same to the MP, but we'll take a while to get there. So we need to have methods, and there are people in the room, I'm sure, who will think about how we go about doing that, you know, around communications and how we differentiate, because there is this confusion at times, and particularly the further down the tree you get, people are more confused about who's working where, why have they got two email addresses, why does Mick Titherington send an email to all Chorley councillors when he means all Leyland councillors, South Ribble councillors, you know what I mean? It's happening, isn't it? So we have to get over that, and I'm quite sure we can do that. Sure.
So Alistair, somehow Mick tried blaming me for that, and I was nowhere near him. Matthew, and then Margaret.
Yeah, that's Mick all over. First of all, I'm really pleased to hear Margaret say what she just said, because there has been some tension, whether we like it or not, because of some of the comments that some members have made. And some concerns about whether everybody's still on board with this. So I'm really, really pleased to hear you say that. I think maybe when this comes, I mean, yes, most of the top table is, but look at our Section 151 officer. There's someone who has never been a Chorley employee or a South Ribble employee, and that over time, that's what will happen. But we have to remember, how many Section 151 officers do we have? The temporary ones, and now we've got some. Because of shared services, we've been able to attract somebody of Louise Mattison's quality to come and be our joint Section 151 officer and bring the qualities that she does. But I'm fairly confident she's only come because of shared services, the opportunity to be the Section 151 officer for 2 district councils. So I think maybe as part of this, when it goes to full council, there needs to be that, you know, reiteration of why we're doing what we're doing, why, acknowledging that there's tensions in both councils caused by this, but as long as we're on the track that we want to be on, those tensions have got to be managed, and that might mean, you know, you have to tell Lindsay off. Good luck with that. Karen, you have to tell some of your group off every now and again, and that we remain committed in principle to what we're trying to do. That's all, you know, maybe there just needs to be a chance to have a chance to say that publicly in full council would be really useful in my view.
I think what Matthew's just said does have some resonance. the fact that there is tensions at Chorley as well as tensions at South Ribble. And I think that doesn't come out. I think it needs to. It needs to be. South Ribble needs to feel that they're not the ones on their own, that there is tensions on both sides. And I think that's important.
Margaret and then Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to point out that I was pleased to read on page 33, I think it is, paragraph 3, all of the different areas whereby Chorley has adopted South Ribble policies, because having reviewed the different projects, I've realised that not necessarily everything that happens in Chorley is the best way of going about doing things, and that we have an open mind and accept that there are other ways of working, and some of which are more efficient and produce better outcomes. And particularly in regard to the green agenda, I think that's the expertise and experience of South Ribble has been embraced by Chorley, to be honest. So, we just need to get along better together and accept we'll always be different, but there are major advantages in working as a team. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. Karen?
Yeah, thank you. Coming from my point of view, I think a lot of the tensions and misconceptions have come from because all the reports and the meetings were all confidential. And so I think members felt as though they weren't included and didn't know what was going on. But now, hopefully, now that we've got these monitoring reports moving forward, it will be more open, and members will feel as though they are part of it and can contribute and have the say and understand more where the shared services is moving on to.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. The fact with because we did discuss this a number of months ago, the confidential reports are actually available to every member. And I know within our group, Matthew, we hold briefings on we make sure all the members get the copies of the report. So again, I think that's just down to us, and we need to, Chris, make sure that, the reports are shared, and that every member is entitled to the information. So Gary?
Yeah. If I could just make a few points. The ribbon from the MP, let me assure you, wasn't just last week, it's every time I see him. He said, he reminds me, can I remember how to get here and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's an aside. Just a reflection for members. Staff, and I said this right at the outset, are working really, really hard for both councils. And whilst I'm hard-nosed and hard-skinned, not all staff are. And when they hear some of those comments, they get quite upset about it, because they are doing the best, trust me, for both councils. So I would ask that members just kind of reflect on that. And the position around the officers, and I've said this constantly, unfortunately at South Ribble, a whole layer of management was stripped out. Yeah, so there are gaps. And in different circumstances, and had they been there, we would have been into competitive processes for a number of jobs. It's just the fact that they aren't there is why it is how it is to a great extent. But as Matthew says, over time, we would anticipate that would change. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Gary. Any further comments from anyone? I think we're just asked to note, Chris, with this report. We've noted it. Obviously, there's a number of comments that have come through as well, and I think both councils undertook to take this report to their council meetings as an update report, and then moving forward they would go to the cabinet, and then and then clearly, Karen, scrutiny. Anything can be scrutinised, and I completely support that. So good. Is everyone happy that we move on then? Thanks, Vicky. So bear with me a second. We're then into the Shared Services Future Development, which is agenda item 6. Chris.
Thank you. I think probably does actually follow on relatively well from the past items discussion, and actually quite a few of the bits that I'll probably pick up in this presentation are the issues that have just been discussed by the committee. We discussed at, I think, the last committee that we needed to look forward now and to consider what are the next steps that we'd take in the relationship between South Ribble Borough Council and Chorley Council. And this report attempts to make some proposals, make some considerations about what that could look like. It starts with a bit of background, which I suspect the vast majority of members on this committee will be very well rehearsed on, which is that we agreed that we would expand shared services back in 2019. And on agenda page 38, there are the principles that were agreed by the two full councils at that point around how shared services would work and how it would develop. In those proposals, it identified phase one, which we undertook and delivered, and also indicated that as a minimum, ICT and customer services would be brought forward in phase two. We've obviously gone slightly beyond that because we have also shared the directors team. But as we've come to the end of the review of customer services and are now into the implementation of that changed model, it's a good opportunity to look again at what we do next. And so I think I probably don't need to cover it in too much detail. On agenda page 39, there's a very, very brief summary of the benefits and issues of shared services. It is probably covered in more wholesome detail in the report that we've just considered, and we'll go on to the two full council meetings. But just a couple of bits to highlight. On the benefit side is, yes, about savings, but also the point around resilience and the ability to share best practice. On the issue side, I think we have already touched this, a perception of a Chorley takeover from some parts of South Ribble Borough Council, and also on the other side, a perception that there's been an adverse impact on service delivery at Chorley. So again, emphasising that point, actually, both councils can see both the benefits of shared services and also the challenges that come with it. I think Gary covered some of these issues around the concerns over the capacity and staff in key teams and key roles, and the potential concern around the speed of change and the impact that that has on staff morale, which again, I think we've discussed. The next section sets out the potential options that we could take in approaching future shared services, and it ranges from stopping sharing. I haven't got any impression from past or current discussions from Shared Service Joint Committee that that is there, but it is obviously always a consideration that should be made. It's far better to plan for stopping sharing rather than to do it when the relationship has broken down. A further option is to pause further expansion. So say, well, we now implement customer services and we'll now wait. And there's some advantages to that in that it allows a period of consolidation. There are some disadvantages to that in that it potentially would miss opportunities where either there is a need for further change or actually there's an opportunity to build further resilience or improve performance for one or both councils. And also, it might not achieve what we would set out to achieve in a pause, which actually it may well not actually provide the certainty that some staff might want, because if a pause is to end, it will mean change at some point in the future. The next option is around identifying future phases of shared services, and we've broadly said that we could take a couple of approaches to this. One is we carry on as we are. We move on to a further directorate or service and say we're going to share the whole of this directorate. And like we did in phase one and phase two, we undertake a review and come forward with proposals as how we have a single operating model. A different approach for a future phase could be that we're more targeted. So we identify areas where one or both councils lack capacity or resilience. And so we slightly change the focus, that instead of the end being a single operating model, it starts from the point of view of actually emphasising the benefits of resilience and improved performance that can be achieved. Moving on, we could review and strengthen existing management arrangements, and this picks up on issues that have been raised previously at the Joint Committee around whether we've got the capacity right, whether we're asking people to do too much, whether there is stresses and strains within the organisations. But it also picks up that we have got a number of inconsistent arrangements going on across the two councils within shared services and outside of shared services in terms of management structures that the two organisations separately probably need to address anyway. And so there might be an opportunity of having a look to see how does it work separately, but also how does it work together. And then finally, we could be opportunistic. So we could wait and see and say, we'll see what opportunities come up. That gives an advantage that actually we can be quite targeted in what we do. It may limit any anxiety, but it doesn't really help in terms of a planned approach, and may become quite piecemeal, and not responsive to the longer term needs of the two organisations. So they're the broad options. It is also an opportune moment to relook at the principles that were agreed in 2019. Obviously, some of them don't apply anymore anyway, because some of those principles were around some of the services that we've already shared. There are some proposals made for what those principles could look like at paragraph 17, agenda page 41. We have attempted to make sure that we have re-emphasised the independence of the two councils, the fact that there isn't this is not a plan for merger, it is a plan for sharing, and that both councils remain independently responsible for their own decision making and performance. And then in the final section, it then draws out some potential proposed approaches, and this is based upon what we've heard from the committee in previous discussions. And it suggests that what we should look at is two of the options that were set out in the table above. One is to develop proposals for further phases of shared services, but that further phase should be more targeted. It should be based upon identified need in terms of service performance or resilience, rather than looking at a full directorate and I suppose a bigger bang approach to sharing. And then secondly, alongside that, we should undertake a review of management capacity across the two councils to make sure that we've got the right capacity for both councils individually and collectively to deliver services. On agenda page 42 is proposals for how we would then undertake that if the committee and councils decided that was the approach they wanted us to take. And just to highlight that because we slightly delayed this and we were going to come before Christmas and we're now coming now, we have started to do some work individually within the councils looking at management capacity. We're very, very early. When I say we've started, it is initial discussions and gathering of information. It may be, and I think Gary hinted at this in the last agenda item, it may be that we identify some areas where we think there's priorities that aren't perhaps resourced in the right way, and we might need to bring that forward. So it's here for discussion. Hopefully it recognises the discussions that have been previously had at the committee and reflects some of those concerns and hopes for sharing.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for that very detailed presentation. And also it's pleasing within the report that we've just been completely honest about the positives and negatives and where the challenges that we face. And I think that's how it should always be. We should face up to it. For me, we're having a look back, aren't we? We're having a look back at what we've done, and is the management, is the management team and capacity right for what we've implemented already? Because I think as you said, I think the committee said on a number of times that we need to keep a close eye on this and make sure it's just not about, as Matthew said before, about saving money. It's about resilience and making sure that people are supported and we can continue to deliver the shared services. And then I always think, and I've said this before, that we should always be looking continually at opportunities. And just because tonight, hopefully, we approve the proposals to look at further opportunities within the shared services, it's got to come back to this committee to be approved and then go to the councils as well. So we're not actually giving rubber stamping anything now. We're just saying keep looking, which I think is eminently sensible. And just to be opportunistic as well, Chris, I do think that the white paper that came out yesterday, that there may be some opportunities there for district councils to do something differently and do something more as well. It's quite clear in there, and perhaps you could look at that. And let's be opportunistic, and we've got the shared services there, and if there is something, I don't know what it is, by the way, that we can do together really quickly, let's look at and grasp that opportunity as well, because the two councils are certainly here to stay. So that's my views on this. Clearly, the recommendations that you're asking us to look at here is that we endorse the principles for the future of shared services as set out in paragraph 17, and that will go to councils. That the committee endorse the proposed approach to the future development of shared services, and look at developing further resilience potentially in the review of the management capacity, and then these will be then presented to council, as we say. Yeah, so yeah, I am fully supportive. So who wants to open up first? David.
Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious that there's a further item on the agenda that might be regarded as opportunistic. Certainly makes sense, but I wonder to what extent the management really want us to deal with every aspect of moving things between management chains, or taking advantage of the opportunities that might arise if there are small elements. I'm thinking that the reason I'm asking this is I had a meeting in Parks, and my understanding was that some elements have had to move because they made either a better fit or they made it more sense to move from Azim's command to somebody else's so that they could cope with things. I just assumed that part of the management, you would level that up anyway without necessarily bringing every item to us, because I don't know every team within the two councils to know what their strengths and weaknesses are, to know whether or not this group would need to sort of say, yes, you think it's a good idea. You know, management has to have a role with that, don't they?
Yeah, we do. I think in a previous discussion, probably 9 months ago, and maybe actually might have been longer, we had agreed that if there wasn't a budgetary impact and it wasn't going to make anyone redundant, there would be some opportunities where actually Gary's head of paid service may be able to move things forward. I think this approach tries to balance that. So I suppose it asks us to go away and actually proactively look for some of those opportunities to develop a programme of work around it. I don't think it will stop those day-to-day or month-to-month changes that we might make, or smaller adjustments that we might make. And I think you can see some of that already in some of the examples of sharing of best practice. We don't share climate change, but we do, in that we get the staff who work on climate change at either council to talk proactively to each other. It is some of those things that will happen quite easily in the background. But the proposal here is that we go and proactively look for, right, what are the areas where actually there should be opportunities. And it is useful to link to the next agenda item again, because, in an ideal, entirely perfect, rational world, we would bring forward the pest control proposals alongside proposals around phase 3 following this report. That isn't how the world works. We have an opportunity because of issues that particularly Chorley are facing. It makes sense for us to bring it forward. So you will still see that things will come outside of that plan.
Self-rule takeover, you're saying there?
On pest control.
So, yeah, of pest control. So it's a very relevant point. I'm glad you brought it up, that, Chris. There's one of the huge benefits that I think that I see of shared services is actually some of the directorates outside of shared services as well. Because the management team and directors are working so closely together, there's synergies there where we're assisting one another outside of shared services. And you know what? Probably even supporting each other as well when it's needed. And surely that's just to a benefit of both local authorities. So that is pleasing. And as you say, I get your point, David, as well, that we shouldn't be. We're not here to micromanage everything. Clearly, we're not. But I think it's just managing, and what Margaret said before is we're just a little bit sensitive at times as we move forward, and as things calm down, perhaps the management and the moving forward will become a bit easier for the officers as well. So it was Alan and then Alistair.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And my comments are all around the macro management. I think something you mentioned in that the government white paper will have an influence. There's the bigger influence on the county deal and how that will look in going forward. You've also got issues that I know still exist around IT and where it's going and procurement. I just think a lot of this is the macro of organisational development, and part around, to also look at not just where the white paper may take us, but also look where we may have to outsource items, that we can't cope with it within either shared service or either council. So I think there's a bigger piece than this. I see it as a sort of one wedge in the whole thing, but I'd like to see more of the whole thing than just pick it off as one item.
Alistair?
Yeah, 3 points. Not to hold back, and a bit of it's following up on what Alan said. Number one is just about stopping. We have got an exit strategy and plan, haven't we, in place? Yeah. Over what period would it stop? Yeah.
It's 12 months. Each party has to give 12 months notice, and then we work.
You've read it more recently than me, Margaret. That's fine. Okay, so that's fine. Yeah, right. Okay. I'm glad we have, because, like I said, you should have something like that. And I knew we agreed it, but I haven't seen it, and I haven't read it. So I haven't read it lately. So, on the basis that I don't want to know about that particularly, 2 comments. One is to follow up on Alan's comments. Yes, there is opportunity coming because of the direction of travel around sharing generally and capacity of all councils and working councils and groups of councils. Quite what the Levelling Up white paper does for that, I'm not quite sure. We're still digesting it. What we are seeing, though, is the opportunity, like Paul said, to pick things up from other councils, perhaps, who perhaps don't want to do certain services. That's a question for us we might need to consider in the future. And also, not that I even mentioned this, but the approaches from other councils to join in with us on things, because that is a way that others are looking at what we are doing, and it is making them think. Now, at the moment, we've got enough issues to sort out ourselves, but in due course, there might be certain areas that we're better working on a larger scale or even a small scale. We don't know. So I think we need to be flexible, which then probably brings me to my third point, is in that situation, I don't think we can pause or stop shared services. I think, like a shark, you have to keep moving forward. You have to be opportunistic at a minimum, and the recommendations that are there, that we actually have a plan of what we're going to do, is right. I think we still need to keep moving forward. Where it stops, I don't know, because it's what's right for our residents, it's right for the services we deliver, and it's right for that we keep improving as councils, because the minute we don't, we should be stopping, and the minute we don't, we should be pausing. And therefore, on the back of that, I'm happy with that. I think what's more important is that resilience, the management resilience stuff, and the proposals about that review of capacity. That, to me, is the critical bit of this, because one dictates the other. You can't take on more change without a greater capacity and a greater resilience and what have you, because that's where the risk comes in. And therefore, I'm happy to endorse the proposals. I'm interested where others are on that, because it's not something you can really just decide, I don't think, at any point in time, because it's a constantly changing picture. But I think we do need to always take account of the fact that this is putting an increased strain on our capacity, and we need to reinforce that, strengthen that, and do what we can to predict that, to sort that out, because that is what will constrain us ultimately.
Thanks, Alistair. I totally agree. I think the look back, if you like, and looking at management resilience is critical. I think that needs to be done as a priority. And you know, one of the things that Alistair did say that I will endorse, when we're at Lancashire Leaders, there was we genuinely get questioned on this all the time by the other district council leaders, because they're really enthused by it. They really are. It's and the opportunities, but then when they see, I hate saying this, but they sometimes just look at the numbers though as well, and the savings that we're achieving. But then it's also about the resilience and the service levels that we're achieving as well, and what we're looking to do. And we do constantly be at every single Lancashire Leaders meeting. There's one of the Lancashire Leaders asking about the shared services, which is really pleasing. What is interesting though is when the chief executive has to decide when he comes in who he sits next to, and it is always a challenge for Gary, because I must admit, me and Alistair do at times deliberately we sit separately, and you see Gary's face, and he does look at both, and he's like that. No, but anyway.
Chair, just to come back on that, but what's interesting is, and this comes back to a point we discussed it a lot earlier about working, who you choose to work with or who you thrust together with. An awful lot of the councils aren't particularly keen on working with their own neighbours, so therefore they'd rather pick and choose who they work with, and therefore they see us bizarrely as an attractive proposition. It's terrible that you've been asked to dance at a do. It's why have you picked me kind of thing. Yeah.
But it does give us a greater voice as well. Just before I call in Sam next and then Matthew, is that we are seen as a in Central Lancashire, two district councils working strongly together, and it does add to your voice, I feel, when we're in negotiations. So it's Sam and then Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. You've asked for where people are at, or Alistair did. I was saying to Alan in the car on the way here that when I looked at the broad sweep of the agenda tonight, I was a bit worried that we were taking the view that everything's going really, really well. Let's slow down. And to me, obviously, as you take on a piece of work of this scale, then obviously as you get a couple of years in, you do need to review, and that is an extra task on top of the other tasks that you have to do. But it strikes me that if things are going well, and as long as you can do it within the capacity that we've got, there's no reason necessarily to slow down. And there are two reasons to continue full steam ahead, if you will, which is number one, if there are, and part of it is about savings. If there are savings to be made, it's better to make those savings earlier and therefore for a longer period of time. And we have a duty to local people to do that with the money they spend. But also, in terms of what we've mentioned already in the committee, some of the issues are about uncertainty and going through a process for staff. And as we've perhaps seen, when you get to the other side, it's a little bit better. And so you're better getting to the other side earlier in order to get it over and done with. So that's probably a good thing to do. What I'd like to see, in addition to the possibility of obviously offering services, outside our areas, if that's a possibility, is for those services that are within our boundaries to say, these are the services that are left. These are the ones where we think there are the greatest opportunities. And I think that would be useful for a future meeting so that we can talk about that sensibly.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I wholeheartedly agree, and I think that will be the outcome of the review. Yeah. And I think there'll be positives and negatives presented to us for the different areas that we may or may not wish to look at. Matthew?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. First of all, I'm not sure I enjoyed Alistair comparing shared services to a shark. So perhaps a bit unfortunate thinking what we've talked about earlier. Yeah, as long as it's a South Ribble shark gobbling up Chorley, then I'm quite content with that one. I've always been really bullish about shared services. Even when we were in opposition here at South Ribble, I always thought it was something worth pursuing, and I haven't changed. Nothing's happened to change my mind. Things do seem to be going well. I'd echo the comments that Sam have just made. For those staff who've had to go through this process, it's been really difficult for them, but once they get there, and I worry and wonder about all the staff who are sat there thinking, will we be next? And I'm worried about what's going to happen, and are we going to forego the opportunity to get them through it and realise all the benefits that there are potentially there, both for them and for our residents. I did say earlier, didn't I, shared services isn't all about the money, but I would have liked to have seen some reflection in bullet point 23 that says about what the approach will be to looking at potential future shared services. I would have liked there been something in there as where we can identify savings, because it's not identified. It talks about a lack of capacity, new priorities, blah blah blah, but it doesn't say where there are potential identified savings. And as a finance portfolio holder, it would be wrong of me not to mention that.
Chris?
I agree. So we should add that in. And actually, just reflecting on the last couple of comments, what this proposal doesn't do is doesn't preclude us actually coming back. And I think Councillor Chapman's kind of sets out that, that is probably is what's in my mind, is we would be coming back to the committee to say we've considered these areas probably separately for each council to understand the needs and potential benefits or risks of sharing services. And then the committee will then be able to look, and we'll present a prioritised list of here's where we might share. What that doesn't stop the committee from doing, or the two councils from doing, is saying, well, actually, we're going to go this far or this far over a period of time, and we can have that judgment as well, which then starts to balance those potential benefits against potential risks.
Gary? Sorry, Alan, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's only a very quick point actually on this, because just reflecting on again something you said there, Chris. what we're asked to do is consider what's here to bring to councils in February, and I think February is far too soon. I think there's a big discussion to be had amongst different groups, a discussion to be had generally even here that doesn't reflect just quite what's theirs. So I'm just wondering whether February is a little bit too early.
I think all we're asking for, Alan, in February is to do the things that we've set out. We're not setting out an agenda for the next phase. We'll do that. That won't be available, I don't think, in February, Chris. That's for sure, because we've got lots of other things to be getting on with. But I think it's really important. You know, we talked a lot today about staff. I think that's one of the drivers for me. It would be really good for staff to understand, and things change. You know, we might, you know, each council might change their mind over a period of time, but I think it would be really good to just set out the areas where we're going to look next. The staff are asking us those questions. When are we going to be in shared services, and when? So I do think, whilst I accept your point, Alan, I think from a kind of staff perspective looking in, they'll want to see that as early as we can get it done. If I can just make two other points. We've talked a lot about you know, what we've done, and it's been really great. But the white paper, and one of the things we said was there are some real advantages in how we're perceived and how we go about our business because we do things at scale. And I don't think we've realised those yet. I think we've looked internally a lot because we've had to, because we're getting on with the change process. I think there are two aspects to the next phase. It's looking out because of all the change in the big wide world that's going on, and how do we play into that arena? And that's something we're going to have to resource because it's different, and we're not doing it now. And the other big risk that's emerging, and this is where the piece that we do around what's next is going to be really important, because what we're already seeing is, and if you look at the risk register, thank you, Vicky, she does the risk register, but if you look at it really closely, it identifies the risk of our ability to recruit and retain. And we're already seeing it. It's becoming really, really difficult. So whilst we might be able to deal with things like resilience and stuff like that, that's really important, but our ability to attract and retain staff in key areas, because we've not talked a lot tonight about one of the reasons we do shared services is so we can deliver everything that the councils want. That's the key thing to it. That's why we do it, because we want to be able to deliver all those things. And we're at real risk, I think, of kind of brain drain over, you know, a very, you know, what's going to happen now. It's happening now. So I do think that one of the things that shared services does give us the ability to do is pay better. Yeah, because you're doing a bigger job. It looks more interesting as well. So I do think that's got to be part of the equation. Where are the areas where, unless we do something, we're going to lose our staff, and then we won't be able to deliver anything. Because staff now can get jobs in London, go down once every month, and get paid double what they're doing now. So we need to respond to that as well. I think that's all part of the thinking we need to piece into this paper.
Send that link. So I think the retention of good staff. I should
have said good staff.
Yeah, the retention of our good staff is critical, and we have to do everything in our power to retain our staff. Yeah. Just to be clear before Margaret comes in, Alan, just so we're clear, because I was just checking with Chris, all that's been proposed to send to council in next month, or this month as it is to endorse about the look back and the look forward. There's no proposals going to go for over and above what we're already agreeing tonight, that we're going to have a look back at the capacity of the management and the directors, and we're going to endorse the officers, looking at what the art of the possible is for the next, and then that will then come back to this committee in the coming months, and then then subsequently after that go forward to council again. So we're just asking councils to reconfirm the principles and objectives that we've all signed up to, and just keep it fresh, if you like.
So just come back, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, so it's probably my misunderstanding, but how I understood in reading this paper, there are 5 different options there you can go. Is that what we're considering at these councils? Because if that's completely different, I think there is real decision there of where we go.
Sorry, Alan. Yeah, it is, but there is a recommendation from an officer perspective, which we're asking the committee to endorse, is that we do those pieces of work, which really is saying we're carrying on. The way in which we'll carry on isn't defined at this moment in time. There are some immediate issues that we've got to deal with what we've got, which is around the management capacity and capacity in some areas. So we're going to have to deal with that anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And then if this is endorsed, what we'll then do is come back with, and here are the areas in prioritisation as to where we think we might go next, and that'll be a discussion for the committee.
So just so I've understood it, so what we're doing here, Alan, is we're going to endorse the recommendations that the officers have provided, which is the development of the further phase of shared services. We said what's the art of the possible, but then also having a look back at the capacity of and then we're going to endorse that tonight, hopefully. We'll debate that and we'll vote on that. If that's accepted by this committee, then we'll send them to both the councils to reconfirm that, basically. Yeah. Margaret?
Thank you. I think it's important that we actually do look, particularly at the management, because that level, there is quite a bit of mishmash, and that really does need to be sorted out. And I think people that are actually in those posts would like that sorting out, so that they actually know where they're going and what they're doing. I think where there is possibly a little bit of area that I'm concerned about is, and I think you hit on it, it's identifying future phases of shared services, that there may be the creation, continuing uncertainty with the feeling of a never-ending change. And I think we've got to be careful about that we don't get to the stage where we feel like we're constantly turning the wheel so that nobody ever settled properly. And I think the other thing is that, I think Gary touched on it, that people are asking, are we going to go into shared services? Are we next? Who's here? Who's there? And I think that's a difficulty for some staff members. It's bound to be, because it must create uncertainty. And if we're going to a stage of being, oh, shall we have a look at this one? And somebody thinking, is my job now under threat? So I think we've got to be very careful how we go about this, because we've got to be careful that we actually can see an end product to it before we actually go, you know, who's going to sort of think, oh yes, there may be something in here that we'll just have a look round in here, and then suddenly there's nothing there to actually do anything with. So I think we need as a committee to be very clear where we're going with it, because when we went through the first phase, we all knew, the directorate and the people that were in it knew what was going on. And I think what I'm trying to say is that we don't want to create further uncertainty amongst the staff and a bit of feeling of, oh my goodness me, is somebody going to come and look over my shoulder in the next 5 minutes to see what I'm up to? So I think, you know, while we need to move on, I think we've got to be careful how we do it.
I agree. I absolutely agree, Margaret. We do need to be careful and conscious of that. Alistair and I have discussed this at length about the non-shared service staff, shall we say, and because we're acutely aware that there's uncertainty there. And one of the things, are you happy for me to say, you know, Alistair, I'm looking at, that the one area that we are looking at now is harmonisation of terms and conditions, perhaps, because one of the, I know across the non-shared service staff amongst the two councils alongside our shared services, because, you know, the shared service staff have better terms and conditions. They do. That's fact. Yeah, and there is, you're right, Margaret. So we can, you know, as two sovereign councils, we can assist ourselves here as well by separately from the shared services, having a look at those elements of the business, forgive me for calling it that aren't within that area, and harmonising, and that I think would help greatly. But again, that's a separate discussion for South Ribble and Chorley.
You're right, because right at the big, well, about 12, 18 months ago, when we were going down this route, I highlighted that particularly, that people that are not in shared services are on different terms and conditions and not on as good a terms and conditions, and therefore I think this is where when we're talking about morale, discontentment, whatever it is, I think that's where part of it is. And that's, yes, I think it is something that needs to be looked at, because if I was in that position, I'd be a bit cross.
Wholeheartedly agree. And it's what's your space in? I think there's been discussions about that in South Ribble and Chorley separately. Alistair and then Gary.
Yeah, just to endorse that. I mean, that's the thing. We need to think about the whole picture, and therefore, as we get more people into the shared service arrangements, then they become the majority and the others become the minority, and we have to safeguard those minority as we were. And we are just where we are, really. I think providing those safeguards are put in place, provided we do that work, the proposals, in my view, are fine to go to council. I think they could be slightly more clear about exactly what we're taking. I do understand it when I put my mind to it, but it's not quite as clear as I would like on reading it as others have commented. So I think my question then is I've heard Sam's view, I've heard Alan's view. I think there's a slight difference there. I'm not sure if there is, but as a grouping, is that we carry on? Are you happy to endorse that with the safeguards put in place that we discussed? And then I suppose, for the Conservatives at South Ribble as well, because speaking for my own group, I think Paul's already spoke for his group and Matt has, I think we are happy to endorse the principles of that, subject to it being a bit better worded for wider consumption by councillors, that we do that review of capacity, and then from that we develop towards something that comes back to this committee in due course to consider various options and not be prescriptive about that too much. But it's got to have the capacity behind it to be able to deliver it, and not to be therefore too racy, to quote a phrase, I suppose, is what we're talking about. Is that what I'm saying?
Apologies. Yeah, you've got to look at a more rounded picture before you can move forward. I think on the basis of what would be presented to council I just think there's going to be such big discussion that's going on, which went even on the last piece to even get to that stage. You know, I'm not sure that discussion is as much in Chorley as it will be here at South Ribble. But that's why I'm thinking there's so much more information required. I think a lot of the things around, you know, filling in the gaps of these, like Sam said, these are the services that need to be looked at. You know, is it worth looking? You know, what's left? I mean, I'd never considered when you get to the stage of the next thing on the agenda, they would be talking about pest control and there's a shared service. So what other services are there for people to understand in a bigger picture in the round? What are we discussing?
Did you want to? No. Yeah. Sorry, Alan. Can I just kind of clarify it, because I think I've understood where we're going.
Yeah.
So if we agree the principles, the next phase will be the piece that you're talking about. What's the big picture in terms of what we do next? What are the pros and cons? Looking at looking at each and every service and saying we could potentially share this for the reason, but we're not sharing this for these reasons. I think that's really important for the staff, because we'll have a roadmap then of what happens next. Yeah, we'll be asking the committee. We're not going to go off and do it. You know, we'll be asking and coming back to the committee and to the councils to get agreement to that stuff. So it's just a phasing issue, that's all. What we're asking for is, do you want us to do that piece of work? Do you want us to move forward on those pieces of work? That's all we're asking. And can I just pick up a couple of points from Mrs. Smith, which is really important? The beauty of actually moving to shared terms and conditions for everybody, and it's a big piece of work, by the way. Let's not underestimate that. Trust me, it's a massive piece of work. No, it's not me. It's Vicky who'll be doing all this, not me. Vicky's team. Yes. Is that when you do shared services, it's easier, because those main issues which people are bothered about, which is around terms and conditions, are dealt with. It's then about what does the shared service look like? So it does make it easier over time. And Mrs. Smith was quite right that our biggest challenge is managing change. That's one of our biggest challenges. And what we're finding is that real softer stuff around kind of spending time with staff and engaging with staff, you know, and working with them to get through the change process. We're not spending enough time on that, because the directors are running around getting stuff done. So these are some of the things in terms of the management capacity we're just going to have to try and fix as we move forward. But we need to do it fairly quickly, I think. That's the point. So some of the things around capacity and some of these things around what we need to fix, some of the things that aren't working now, we need to get on really quickly. We can then take a breath if we've endorsed the principles at the councils and work through, well, what happens next. So that would, I'd see that's how it would play out. Chris, is that right, Chris?
Margaret?
We had, I don't call it a learning hour, I don't know what it was, when the directors came and the members came and spoke to them, and it was very informative. And I found it that some of the directors, to me, the amount of different disciplines that they were actually having to cope with, to me, I found it mind-boggling. That there was, to me, some of them had just far too much to do in the disciplines that they're involved in. And apart from someone like Louise Matheson, where you can completely understand where she's coming from because she's in finance and finance is finance, some of the others had all sorts of things. And I think that worries me, that they have got too much to do and that they haven't got time to spend on certain other things, and let's say more the pastoral things, I'll call it that way, that maybe they should have. And we've got to be careful we don't cut too much on those sort of things.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things I'll be coming back with, and I'll be coming back probably with some redistribution issues as well, to pick up some of those things. But you now realise, Margaret, how difficult it is being a chief exec, because I've got all those things to deal with as well.
So, Margaret, what you've said there is something that we've challenged Gary with, because we share your concerns, and hence why we're having the look back to make sure that it is structured appropriately to continue the excellent services that we're delivering, because your concerns are shared. They are.
Thank you, Chris. My concerns are with the capacity of the management, and with your assurance that you are looking at this. I do feel that the directorships are too, they have too many things underneath them and can't get to grips with them. And I know I've spoken to Gary about this, and with problems of some of the problems we've had in IT with the staff, and my concerns was, like with Margaret, would somebody come in, is it going to be me next? So we need to tread very carefully on this. And I do think that we need to bring whatever we bring to council, it has to cover the safeguarding, like Alistair said, and be clear in the principles, so that members do understand that we're not setting up to, we're going to do this, this and this. It's just the principles of moving forward. We're looking back and making sure what we have is working properly. And then we're going to look at other things that will improve, like you said, Gary, our resilience and our to enable us to recruit the best staff that we can for our services.
Yep, thanks, Karen. Thank you, Chris.
I just wanted to, I suppose, give clarity from my point of view in terms of what is in my mind as I was writing this report to go next. So to be clear, the reason for suggesting it would go to the February council meetings is actually based upon previous discussions at this committee, where members raised concern that actually beyond this committee, many councillors wouldn't know what was affecting 50% of the staffing structure and significant amounts of services. The last time we went to full council was actually in December 2020, which was with the proposals around shared director and shared chief executive posts. Actually, the last time we went in principle around shared services was September 2019. So it's quite a considerable amount of time, and a lot of stuff has happened since then, including a global pandemic. And so really the idea of going was exactly to go with very broad options about where over 2 years into our new phase of sharing. Here's some very broad options around what we could consider doing, and this is the basis on which the Shared Services Steering Committee is proposing that we should first carry on, but second, we should look in two key areas. One is a review of management capacity, and then secondly, we should identify a further phase, a phase 3, but that should be based upon doing a piece of work for each council individually first to identify where they anticipate the greatest level of benefits, and those benefits could be from improved service performance or resilience, but could also, on the basis of the discussion tonight, could be from significant savings or better ability to recruit and retain staff. If the councils are happy with those principles, those pieces of work would be undertaken, represented then to Shared Service Joint Committee, and then where necessary it would go on to, and most probably, full council meetings for further decision. And in my mind, what that piece of work will look like at the end will be a roadmap, it will be a programme, so that people don't feel that just around the next corner could be sharing for them, but that it would be based upon making sure we get the management capacity right before we start expanding sharing further, because we know that puts great strain on it.
Just before bringing in Alistair, one point from me that you've just mentioned there, because in the committee we haven't really mentioned this, is when we've introduced a raft of shared services during a global pandemic, and I think it's not got to be lost upon us the huge additional work that has thrown our directors as well. So it's not just delivering, the usual services, shall we say, but the huge amount of additional work that's come into the councils, and it continues. We continue to work on, and I think that you have to be cognizant of that, Chris, when we're looking at this as well, because hopefully that isn't going to be forever. We say touching MDF, but not lost upon that. We made a big decision as a committee and two councils to continue with this during the pandemic, and it has been a challenge to maintain business as usual as well. And so it's great credit to the officers, because they are being pulled left, right and centre. Alistair?
Agreed, totally. And so therefore, going back to Gary's point, it appears the officers want us to endorse this way forward so they can get on and do some of that management capacity stuff and resilience. On the back of that, if we're doing that work, that's to prepare us for the next phasing, or whatever we're calling phase 3A, whatever it's going to be called. When would that come back, would you expect, Chris? Because if we put out meetings in February, it ain't going to come back to this committee till probably April, May.
No, and very likely, because we go very rapidly into, particularly at Chorley, pre-election period at that point. So I would anticipate. The reality is there's quite a lot of work we'll need to do. We will need to do quite a lot of engagement with the existing management structure to understand where the pressures are and all that type of stuff. And we'll need to undertake considerable work around looking at the potential areas of saving. So I would imagine, to be honest, it wouldn't be unreasonable to bring back to the first meeting in the new municipal year to here, and then on to council meetings beyond.
So we're into the summer, come autumn kind of.
Can I ask
for the phase 3?
Or phase 3.
Yeah, for phase 3.
Yeah, let's be clear. Phase 3. Let's be clear on this. In terms of the senior capacity, we've already been doing quite a bit of work on that.
Yes.
So I expect to see that at the February council meetings, because I've got some propositions that I want to put before councils anyway. The phase 3 stuff, I agree, will be later on in the year.
That couldn't be clearer.
Awesome.
Margaret?
Sorry, Gary's just said he's got some proposals he wants to put before council. Should we be knowing about them before it gets to council?
I haven't quite done them yet. But I do need to. I think we need to be getting on with some stuff, and this is it's back to your point, David, about how do we work through the process of working it through this and getting to a decision. I think there are some things that we need to do now in the coming period. So I'd like to put some propositions to council. I'm happy to convene an additional, if people want this, as a joint committee to work through those proposals. But I would like to take some things to the councils.
Right, so if we're going to take 2 reports to the council meeting in February, we're taking a report that says this is what we've done on shared services, which is the first thing we saw tonight. We've got this report now, which is the direction of travel. Alongside that, because of requirements for management capacity, you're going to bring additional proposals to individual councils to make changes, though, to structure that's already in place, presumably.
But some of those proposals will be shared.
But going back to David Shaw's point, we don't have to, the positions are effectively in place, aren't they? the management is already in place on those shared arrangements, or is it not?
No, these will be new posts.
Right. So in that case, they do need to come back to a meeting with this. But next meeting, just for those issues, not everything else.
No.
Right.
But, so if the committee agree, then we'll have to put an extra meeting in. Because don't forget, it's linked to budget rounds and everything else, and then
So they're through.
then we'll be into elections and no meetings.
So through you, Chair, I think we agree that the proposals as drafted now, with the caveats that we've added on tonight, in terms of a bit more clarity for the two papers to come back to the next meeting, so they can go. And in the meantime, we have a separate meeting just about any additional capacity you want to put into the structure.
Just a second, Margaret, just 1 second. Just so I'm clear, you do realise, Gary, that the council meetings are in 2 or 3 weeks' time, and so we're going to have to work really, really quickly on this if we're going to have a meeting.
As I say, quite a bit of the thinking has already been done, so just need to draw it all together. So this time.
Margaret?
The way Chris articulated the way forward, if that could be put into the paperwork, because it was very, very clear. Yeah, please do. Well, it's recorded, you can go through it. I think that would be helpful, because it was very clear how we want to progress, and therefore it would be helpful, I think, to the members who are not on this committee. They would see it then.
Right, okay, I think we know where we're going. I'm going to complain, Gary and Chris, that if that was your plan to bring forward a new management structure to councils in 3 weeks' time, it should have reflected in this paper. It should have been.
It is, but it's not explicit.
No, it's not
a new management structure. It's some additional capacity.
Yeah, I accept that, but we just needed for it to be more explicit. Yeah. But we accept that, and we accept that it's for the right reasons. So to make progress then, we have the recommendations in front of us, with the additional recommendation that we're going to convene an additional meeting of the Shared Services Joint Committee to review the additional management capacity proposals that Gary and Chris want to present to us. Prior to those, subject to our then subsequent approval, if that's provided, we'll then go through to the council meetings. Now, I am acutely conscious of time, so we're probably looking at next week, Gary, I would suggest. And if we're making a decision, it can't be done virtually, can it? No. So we're going to have to. So we'll look at that anyway. So is everybody happy to accept the proposals? Is everyone happy with the proposals, and we'll move forward? With the improved wordings. Yes. So So Chris will rewrite the report so that it's reflective of actually what they want to do.
Which can be endorsed at that same meeting, Chair. Good.
We all happy? Right, thanks for that. A good debate there, and it's which is always helpful. Right, moving on then. I think it's exclusion of press and public now. Find the agenda. Yes, and then we're into the shared pest controls. Can we turn the link off?
You need to vote.
Is everyone happy to exclude the press and public? Yeah, thank you.